Hey guys, it's that pastor with no answers back in your earbuds, and we are reflecting today on September the 11th, 2001. Depending on when you're listening to this episode, we are either embarking on the 17-year anniversary or we're a little bit or a long ways past it. This podcast is about real people, real stories, real discussions, real disagreements. And typically the people on this podcast are folks that I have known in my past, know currently, or will know in the future. I'll tell you more about that in another episode. But today I want to speak, or I am speaking to a friend in my past, Kelly Dick, and she is going to tell a story of how 9/11 affected her. This story has to do with a significant other in her life who ended up being a hero. So as we are talking to normal folks typically on this podcast, this guy ends up not being so normal. He ends up being an American hero that you can Google. You can Google the man with the red bandana, and that is the guy that was connected to this friend of mine and whose life was tragically ended along with many thousands of others on September the 11th, 2001. Hope you enjoy this real story, and may we truly never forget.
An incredible plane crash into the World Trade Center.
That happened within the last few moments.
Just a few moments ago, something believed to be a plane crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. We have no idea of what it was. It was a tremendous boom.
A gigantic sonic boom.
The air is filled with hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper that are just sort of floating like confetti.
Stuff just started falling, like bricks and paper and everything. When I looked over, there was this guy that was on fire. He was like screaming, and I just told him to roll, and he said he can't.
He caught fire as a result of the falling debris?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what hit the World Trade Center? We're getting reports that an airplane hit the building.
I hear a plane, then all of a sudden I saw it go right into the World Trade Center.
So
right
you saw a plane crash into the side of the World Trade Center?
Yes, sir.
All right, so Kelly, we thank you for joining us, and it has been a long time since you and I have talked. Holy cow, we I guess we were going to the same church back in 2005. Oh my gosh.
Has it been that long? Wow, okay.
Yep. I know that's when Priscilla and I moved back to Charleston, and so that's when we got to know you a good bit, but my gosh, time has flown. And now you're in Charlotte, married, got a little girl. Things are rocking and rolling.
Yes, and she's a whole nother story we'll have to talk about someday.
There you go. What? Oh, now you got me curious. Like, just a really awesome kid?
No, was told I would never have kids.
Dang.
And God told me otherwise. And there's a lot of miracle story to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of miracle story to
that. Yeah, that is definitely the kind of stuff we talk about on here. All right, so we are reflecting on a pretty tragic day in our country's existence. And I was thinking about this, how many kids now are turning into adults that have zero reference point other than what the teachers are teaching them. Like, it's amazing me. So I'll throw some numbers. I'll say, let's just, for discussion's sake, say that everyone born after 1998, they have no recollections of 9/11. So people born in 1998 are about 20 years old. So basically people 20 years old right now and younger, they only know about 9/11 from what people tell them, from the documentaries, from podcasts like this. They do not have any memories. Isn't that crazy? 20-year-olds have no memories.
It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. Sure.
Yeah. So how old were you in 2001, and what was your life like? What was your day-to-day?
In 2001, I would have been in my 20s, my early 20s.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was living in Connecticut, working in both Connecticut and New York, because, of course, up there, it's a short commute.
Yeah.
And I worked actually in the world of pro hockey.
That's right.
I worked for a team in Connecticut, and then I did some side work for actually the New York Rangers, which I loved.
Yeah. So waking up Tuesday morning, did you get up early? Were you able to sleep in and you had to work late, or what was your schedule like? If you can remember that far back, 17 years ago.
Oh goodness, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
All the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And no, I was running late that morning. So I had sort of run around, got dressed, got ready, headed to work. I remember distinctly that it was a gorgeous day. Like, it was absolutely crystal clear, blue skies, not a cloud to be seen. And I remember just jamming out on the ride to work and enjoying it thoroughly until my phone started to blow up.
Yeah.
And when my phone started to blow up, it became a very different day really quickly.
Yeah, for sure. It's so crazy, and you'll probably see that I jump all over the place, but I am interested in what sort of emotions this sort of thing brings up 17 years later, because just having this conversation with you, and you and I are not like best friends, but I know a little bit about you, and just living through this as someone who did not suffer major tragedy with someone that I knew, and putting myself back then, it's just emotional. I don't think that anyone can necessarily, like those 20-year-olds and younger, it's probably the same sort of thing like Kelly and Joey. We can't fathom what it was like when people found out JFK was assassinated. Like our parents talk about it. They're like, you just would not believe how crazy it was. And I would imagine that's the same sort of thing we'll be telling our kids and grandkids. Like, you can't grasp it unless you were living it out. So, I mean, is this emotional and not like crying or anything, but is this a sensitive topic to revisit every time, or have you kind of moved in a direction where it's not as emotionally charged?
No, it's always emotionally charged.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that grief doesn't get smaller, that life around it just gets bigger.
Right. You don't ever move on.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's funny, you mentioned, the juxtaposition of us versus those who were around when JFK was assassinated. For me, it was even the stark contrast of living in Connecticut and New York in 2001 and moving to the South in 2003.
Oh, wow.
Just the difference because for the first time I was experiencing it from the point of view where most people saw it on television.
Right.
Whereas living in Connecticut and New York, there was very, very few that I knew that weren't connected somehow.
Right.
I mean, 3,000 died in the towers, but there were hundreds of thousands of people in the city and all that stuff. And so it's almost like a culture shock to experience it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So that idea of not being around when it happened, like, I can't even fathom how anyone would ever truly understand what it was like.
Yeah.
But I appreciate those who do, for sure.
Yeah, I would imagine there's so many different levels. Like I experienced from the television, but then I think about what is etched in the minds of those who were actually running for dear life, thinking that these buildings are going to fall on them, and the smoke pretty much takes over their environment, all the way to the people for the next 3 or 4 days that Kelly is a part of, that frantically trying to get in touch with their loved one or loved ones. I mean, there's just so many different layers of experiencing this. So your boyfriend, fiance, what were you guys at the time?
Okay, so we were young enough back then that we were like, we actually still had the distinction of like, we're talking, not really dating.
Yeah, for sure.
So we were a combination of really good friends, and
Yep.
we were talking. We wanted to be dating, but him living in the city and me living in Connecticut made it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So we kept talking about possibly dating, but we never got that opportunity.
Yeah. So he was in New York City permanently? Like, was that where he was working, or did he not live in the city, just worked in the city? Like, what was he doing on a day-to-day?
No, he lived in the city. He was
Okay.
actually one of my best friends from college. It was his roommate.
Yeah.
And he was a trader at a company called Sandler O'Neill, which
Yeah.
was on the 108th floor of the South Tower.
Gotcha. All right, so your phone starts blowing up. You are at work, on the way to work. Like, what's going on as your phone? And did you have a cell phone? If so, you are such an early adopter. I'm impressed.
I actually had two of them.
Oh, my gosh.
I had a personal phone and I had a work phone. But yeah, so the first call that I remember getting was my mom.
Yeah.
And my mom asking me if I had talked to my best friend.
Yeah.
If I had heard from him this morning. And I was like, no, why? What's going on? She's like, you need to pull over. And I'm like, I am like 2 minutes from work and I am late. I'm not pulling over. So I pull into the parking garage, and that's when she tells me there's something going on. You need to get to a television and you need to get on the phone.
Yeah.
You need to call Chuck.
Yeah.
And so I remember parking my car and going into my office. Now, I actually worked in, like, the building that I was in was the Coliseum, but it was attached to a government building.
Yeah.
So I got in, and it was like mass chaos.
Yeah.
Because not only were our office staff turning on TVs and trying to figure out what was going on, but we were also being informed that our building was going into government lockdown when they figured out what was going on. So nobody could come in, nobody could go out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, and I remember it was like little tiny black and white TV because we're in the basement of a concrete building.
Right.
Trying to see what's going on, trying to understand what's happening, because this was early enough that it was when the first plane hit the first tower. So we really had no comprehension what would come in the next few minutes.
Yeah. And so Chuck was in, like, I don't know building 1, building 2, or the flight numbers. A lot of people that are super into it can name them by that. But was he in the first building that got hit or the second building that got hit?
So Chuck was my best friend, and he was in building 1, and Wells was the guy I was seeing, and he was in building 2.
All right, so building 1 being the one that was hit first?
Correct.
Okay,
so
and did that one fall down first too?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought.
That was what fell first.
Okay. Chuck
actually, and I wouldn't know this until long, long after, but Chuck was actually in the elevator. And when the elevator got to the first floor, it was when the plane hit. So the elevator shook really bad right before the doors were opening. And he told me, like, months down the road, he was like, yeah, I just thought there was something wrong with the elevator.
Yeah.
Oh, but then the door opened and there's smoke everywhere and people freaking out. So yeah, that was his experience.
Yeah.
And then at that time, actually, I wasn't privy to it again until later, but Wells actually, because he knew what was going on in the North Tower, called his mom and left her a voicemail.
Yeah.
To let her know that he was okay.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't his tower and all of that stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, in the immediate, hindsight is 2020, because in the immediate we had no clue the chaos that was going on.
Right.
But looking back, there were all these little pieces that later got filled in that we were like, wow, there was a lot more to the story than we ever imagined.
Yeah, for sure. So do you remember Chuck's account? Like, what were people instructing them to do? Were they telling him, because he would have been above or below the impact in the building? So
he was below the impact, and honestly, I don't remember him ever telling me.
Yeah. Because I heard horror stories of the people in the second tower to stay put, don't evacuate, stay calm, everything's going to be okay. And obviously that was very bad instructions that no one would have known.
that's what Wells left on the voicemail for his mom.
Yeah.
Telling her that he was okay, that they were telling them to stay there, that, they were safe, that nothing had happened to them. But he just wanted her to know that he was safe and that he loved her. And again, like you said, bad instruction. But I do have to admit, Wells's story is a little bit different in that aspect.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump ahead for a second here.
Yeah,
you can pull it back if you need me to. But
no, please do.
So Wells leaves that message for his mom, and then the plane hits the South Tower. And people are just frantically going everywhere. Well, Wells was already in the process of evacuating because his company had actually come behind and said, you know what, we're going to leave anyway, even though they say we're safe. Or at least that's what the stories have sort of pieced together. But Wells actually had he had been a volunteer fireman for years, and was actually one of the conversations we had been having was, even though he had just passed his Serious 6 and his Serious 7, which are like major tests for brokers, he wanted to apply to the NYPD, or excuse me, NY Fire Department, New York Fire Department.
Yep.
And so his company evacuated, and they evacuated, and most of them got out. But Wells decided to turn around and go back in when he saw and realized what was happening. He's actually credited with saving the lives of, I believe it's 5 individuals at this point that had come forward and said, I'm alive because of this man.
Wow. Gracious goodness. So he just once he got a handle on what was going on, he decided to just basically keep going to keep bringing people out, like just keep going as far as he can, I guess. And I mean, did that just entailed him going upstairs, I guess, right? Just keep going.
Yeah, there's actually, so the right after September 11th, I believe it was the next year, the New York Times did, it may have been in the same year, they did a timeline of 5 different people that they followed through the towers and their lives being saved.
Yeah.
And they all talked about this mysterious man in a red bandana who appeared out of nowhere.
So you are talking to a superhero, maybe?
A little bit.
Holy cow.
And so it's a little surreal because when they opened the 9/11 memorial, President Obama actually told Wells' story. And so I'm sitting there watching the opening of this memorial, and all of a sudden his face comes across the screen, and I just
my gosh.
lost.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did. His dad always carried a blue bandana, and Wells always carried a red bandana. And Wells put the bandana on to block the smoke and the debris, and he started back up the stairs, and he got up to the 102nd floor, I believe it was. And he just started combing through and crying out, if you can hear me, follow me. If you can hear me, get up and follow me. And there were people who could follow him, and there were people who couldn't. And the way we knew it was him, because of course they had no identity for him when the newspaper published these timelines.
Yeah,
is this woman told the story of how he had picked her up and threw her over his shoulder and carried her down 100 flights of stairs.
Wow.
And the funny part about it was one of the ways that we've sort of put the story together, all of us over time, is because Wells was known for picking people up and throwing them over his shoulder when they were drunk,
right,
and carrying them up the stairs to the apartment because their apartment was on the 11th floor.
Gosh, dang! So he had a lot of practice.
Yeah. 19th floor.
Yeah.
So he had a lot of practice of it. So the combination of the red bandana and throwing somebody over their shoulder, I got the chance to piece it together when I read the story, and my friends got the chance. And in that process, of course, his mom had pieced the story together, and she reached out to the New York Times and said, I think this is my son. Can you help me?
Oh my gosh.
She sent them a picture, and they sent it out to the 5 people in the story. And within 24 to 48 hours, all of them had written back and said, that's the man who saved my life.
Wow. My goodness. Once you said the word mom, it just made my heart sink, because you just, I'm thinking through your eyes, and that's bad enough. But then thinking of a mother, and she just represents, I mean, so many mothers that lost from. Oh man! All right, so you are able to sit down, I guess, with coworkers. You're watching it on TV. At this point, you've heard that Wells is safe, or did you? Like, had you heard from his mom yet, or like, was there any contact with anybody?
No, my most distinct memory is I was calling Chuck on one phone and Wells on the other phone and trying to get through. And I remember finally getting through to Wells's voicemail.
Yeah.
Leaving him a message and saying, "Hey man, I just need to know you're okay. I know you're probably getting a million calls from people, but call me back. I'm really worried about you."
Yeah.
And the next time I called back and it rang through to voicemail, it told me his voicemail box was full.
Wow.
And I was like, that's it. That's the only chance I'm going to have. I left my message and now I just have to wait.
Yeah.
And it makes your heart sink because you keep calling back hoping that it's going to be something different. And of course, most of the time it was a busy signal because everybody in the country was trying to call whoever they could.
Right.
But yeah, it was that's probably one of the things that's most etched in my memory is that I was one of the last people who got to leave him a voicemail.
Yeah.
I doubt he ever heard it.
Right.
But to me, it was like, okay, like I did everything I could do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I would imagine you are hopeful, and then when you see that tower fall, which was the first one that fell, I'm sure your hope took a major hit. Did you lose hope entirely?
No. It's funny because, at the time, I was a Christian and I didn't have a full comprehension of what a relationship with the Lord looked like or anything like that. But I was one of those, I was like, okay, well, God's good. He'll be fine. He'll be okay. And Sandler O'Neill, the company that he worked for, within 24 hours put up a website where you could go and their employees were checking in to let everybody know who was safe.
Right.
And I just remember all day checking it. The next day, checking it, sitting there with it on refresh on my screen to the point that my boss, who was a lot of words I can't say on your podcast.
Yeah.
At the time, got mad at me and yelled at me, and he was like, "You're too distracted." And I'm like, "I'm sorry. Do you know anybody who was in the tower? Because I'm pretty sure I've got a little bit on my mind that doesn't involve anything that we're doing here." Or
maybe what a cold-hearted pastor that he wasn't distracted. I mean, even if you don't know anybody, holy cow.
Oh, believe me, I quit that job like 2 weeks later because that afternoon. So I told you we went into government lockdown and we weren't allowed to get out of the building. When they determined it was safe for us to leave, they shut down the building and sent everybody home. When they shut down the building and sent everybody home, that boss handed us each a phone list and said, "I'm going to need you to make your sales calls today."
Oh, man.
And three of us looked at him and went, "If anybody were to call me right now, I would never do anything from their company again."
God.
And handed the list back and walked out. So I quit like a week later.
Yeah.
I couldn't work for somebody like that. But yeah, so all of that to say, it was just that chaos of calling. And I mean, it went for days before you'd give up hope. And just when you thought like, okay, I have to let this go, I have to come to reality, some new photo would come out or some new video would come out and you'd find yourself glued to the screen hoping you could just catch a glimpse of him.
Yeah.
Or just be in this picture here.
Yeah. Did you have, if I were in your shoes, I would have, but did you have almost like some fantasies, like months after thinking, oh, what if he were to walk through this door and for some reason he was just trapped somewhere or in the hospital somewhere and just couldn't get in touch with me? Like, did you have those lingering, hoping against all odds sorts of thoughts, months later, or that's not really your personality or what?
No, I definitely had those. I'll be honest. I had those for probably the first couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But when it came to months, at that point, I didn't have a choice but to face reality because my best friend wouldn't leave the apartment because he was convinced Wells was going to come home.
Wow.
And so he was staying there, and none of us could get him to go anywhere or do anything because he was afraid to leave because what if Wells comes home? And at that point, you have to step in and you have to be strong for your friend and go, okay, we can do this together.
Yeah.
But I remember him actually calling me the night of, as they were going hospital to hospital looking for him, and just the noise in the background of people just, in the hospital yelling and screaming at nurses because they're trying to find people, and him trying to keep calm and tell me what was going on, but go through that for himself. And he was with a couple of Wells's other friends, and it was just pure chaos for the first few days, to be honest. It was pure chaos.
Yeah. And how about, I was only experiencing it from a TV week after week it pretty much monopolized all the news. What was it like up in your parts, like for the first month and a half? I mean, I'm sure at the workplace, that's all you talked about. Even, I guess, since you weren't right in Manhattan, you can't really see firsthand what's going on. But, that had to have been everything everyone was ever talking about, watching, looking online, and all of that.
Oh yeah, it was a new story every day. It was a new experience, and it was everything from the tragedy of people losing people to stories of hope, and really random stories like this. My friend's uncle's sister never eats breakfast but stopped for a bagel that morning so she wasn't in the towers. Really random stuff. And then there was the really heartbreaking things. My sister actually at the time was a first grade teacher in a school that was just an hour outside the city.
Right.
And she had the whole conversation with us about sitting there at the end of the day, wondering whose parents were going to show up to pick them up and whose weren't.
Yeah.
So every day was a different story like that. Every day was a different experience. But it was neat as well. Because in amongst all the tragedy, in amongst all the pain and the hurt, you saw New York, New Jersey, Connecticut just come together. People were wearing red, white, and blue. People were nicer than you'll ever experience in New York again. It was like they were a little Southern for a minute there. Like you got in an elevator and everybody said hi to each other.
Right.
I don't think I had ever experienced that in my life, but it was suddenly everybody realized that every minute of every day counted, and the only thing that would be left in the end was each other.
Yeah. That's just, it is amazing the sorts of good that you can only see amidst such evil. Because that was like in America for all of our youngster listeners, it was like, that was one thing that was so precious during that time is, we're humans, and it doesn't matter what political viewpoint, what religious affiliation. It does not matter your gender, sexual orientation. Nothing matters other than, oh my gosh, we may not be as safe as we thought we were. Oh my gosh, there's like tens of thousands of families that are suffering a loved one. We don't know what this means for the future of the world. It was just, you're just in complete shock, but you're like, every single person I know I have that in common with is we're humans. And there was something, it's crazy. It sounds crazy, but there was something to that. There really was something to that.
Oh yeah, and especially up there where it was like playing, the Kevin Bacon game.
Yeah.
The 6 degrees of separation, because you may not have been as close to it as someone like myself, but my friends knew me.
Right.
And so their friends suddenly knew somebody who knew somebody who, and it was just this constant, it was this interwoven web.
Yeah.
Where we're all suddenly connected, even if we didn't mean to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think New Yorkers, people that were right there in Manhattan, people like you who lost someone. I wonder if you guys, and it may not even be something you can put a finger on, but do y'all view terrorism differently? I wonder if you had a different reaction with Osama bin Laden's death and, capture and death. Like, do you think that you view those things a little bit differently? Like, you were also super young back then, so you've matured a lot, so you view things differently, but do you see things differently from me, do you think, when it comes to terrorism and the bad guys, so to speak?
I think I'm the wrong person to ask that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right before all of this, on the 4th of July that year, I actually had been over in the Middle East with the USO, touring with our military.
Gotcha.
I was part of a troop called the Liberty Misses. And we did rest and relaxation shows. So we went and we sang and we danced and we did entertainment shows and we toured with a couple celebrities and stuff. So I actually was overseas in the Middle East, tied to the military at that time. And some stuff went on while we were over there that made a lot more sense when all of this went on in September and we got back.
Right.
But so it was, for me, it was that awkward juxtaposition of all of it crashing into each other.
Yeah.
Because here I am, losing Wells, and my heart is wrenched and crushed because he's passed away in the towers. But my immediate thought goes to those hundreds of men and women that I've just spent 2 weeks with that are now going to go to war.
Right.
And it was that contrast between the two that, to be honest, it felt like, why should death beget death?
Right.
And there was no reconciliation for that. And so the terrorism aspect of it, didn't even exist in my mind. It was just people dying everywhere.
Right.
Which is a very ugly perspective, which led me down a very ugly and dark path for a while. But
I mean, honestly, I think, and I'm not trying to go political here, but I think what you just described is a super healthy thing to remember, just as context. Like if you're wondering whether a war is just or not, or if you are a complete pacifist or whatever, I love how you described. I mean, death is death. It's people losing their lives, and sure, some people may have done a really bad thing, and somebody else is actually trying to do something about it. But bottom line is, if both of those people die, 2 people died. And that's and there's something. 2 moms wondering if their kids are going to come home and all that stuff. Yep. Well, this has actually been a pretty interesting account of just. I mean, I think this is a great big world, and I think you may be the only person that I know who lost someone. I mean, I think I may have met another person, but I mean, you're the only person that I could reach out to and ask for just that narrative. And it really, it's something else how talking about this just brings it, to the surface. And I don't know, all those feelings come back. I remember I'm not a big gym kind of guy, but at the time I was working out in the gym, and I just remember that's all that was on TV. And you'll get a kick out of this. Priscilla was still on the West Coast, and she's just super adventurous, always wants to be on the go. Well, one weekend after 9/11, she was planning on going to Hollywood just to be a tourist and everything. Well, I happened to have heard on the news where they said possible follow-up terrorist attacks are, likely to be in the following areas, and Hollywood was one of them. I was like, no way you're going to Hollywood. You're just not. And she's like, you can't live your life in fear. I'm like, you are my fiance, and I'm going to live my life in fear right now. You're not going to Hollywood.
Oh yeah, they were everywhere, and it was interesting because, like I said, I worked for a hockey team in Connecticut, and I worked for a hockey team in New York, and so even that, I mean, it infiltrated even the littlest things, because now a hockey game was a large gathering place, suddenly we're in a totally different aspect. So that's funny though. I could totally see Priscilla telling you that too, by the way. Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
She went anyway, didn't she?
What's that?
She went anyway, didn't she?
If she did, she lied to me. So
okay, we won't go there.
Well, Kelly, I appreciate your time. You represent thousands and thousands and thousands of people where I'm sure they have the same sort of feelings, that just recounting that day, it brings it all back. It's not the kind of stuff that you forget. And I know you're a stronger person for it, but still, it's a tough thing that a lot of you guys had to endure, and just going through the questions and, am I going to see him again? And that's something else. It's a crazy thought. So thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for letting me share. I appreciate it.